Flaying alive was one of the most cruel forms of punishment and intimidation used by ancient societies to terrorize enemies, punish traitors, and demonstrate power. It consisted of removing a person's skin while they were still alive, usually in large strips, exposing the muscles and underlying tissues. The goal was not only to kill, but to turn the body into a public warning, prolonging agony and humiliating the victim until death. The technique varied according to culture and context. In military or punitive executions, captives or convicts were bound and immobilized, while executioners or soldiers cut and pulled the skin with knives, stone blades, or metal tools. In some accounts, the process began with small incisions that were later enlarged. In others, large strips were torn away quickly to induce shock. The procedure could be so meticulous that layers of skin were removed in sequence, exposing muscles, tendons, and, if the practice was carried to its end, internal organs. Physically, flaying causes extreme pain and hypovolemic shock. Removing the skin exposes nerve endings, producing continuous and intolerable pain. Loss of bodily fluids, risk of infection, and thermal and water balance disturbances accelerate physiological collapse. Depending on the extent and location, the victim could die within hours from shock or acute infection, or agonize for days while the horrendous wound became septic. Many victims entered delirium from pain and blood loss before dying. Historically, there are records and depictions of flaying in several regions. Assyrian inscriptions and reliefs show prisoners exposed and punished in extreme ways, and Persian and medieval chronicles describe executions in which the skin was removed as part of the sentence. Colonial accounts mention extremely violent ritual and punitive practices among the Aztecs, although such sources must be read with caution because of European chroniclers' biases. In various cultures, stripped skin was displayed on posts, hung on walls, or kept as trophies, amplifying its symbolic function. Flaying carried a strong symbolic component. Skin represents the boundary between identity and body. Removing it meant destroying dignity, turning the individual into an object and sending a clear message: challenge authority, and you will face total annihilation, physical and social. In military contexts, it was a method of terror, meant to demoralize enemies and deter uprisings. In internal punishment contexts, it functioned as an example of the ruler's or elite's power. From an archaeological and historical perspective, confirming accounts requires care. Ancient sources can exaggerate or mythologize for political ends. Even so, osteological traces and some reliable descriptions corroborate that flaying was practiced in certain regions and periods. Modern research treats the subject sensitively, distinguishing between ritual execution, punitive measures, and exaggerated enemy propaganda. The social consequences were long-lasting. Communities that witnessed public flayings internalized fear as a mechanism of order. The memory of these practices fed legends, propaganda, and portrayals of the enemy as monstrous. At the same time, the horror of flaying later served as ammunition for critics denouncing regime's barbarity and arguing for moral limits on the exercise of power. Today, discussing flaying alive has analytical and ethical value. It is not about glamorizing violence, but about understanding how societies legitimated torture as a political and symbolic tool. Knowing these methods also serves as a warning. When power chooses to instrumentalize the human body to impose fear, society loses its humanity. In summary, flaying combined lethal efficiency, spectacle, and symbolic meaning. The practice exposed the extreme end of institutionalized cruelty, turning human anatomy into a stage for domination. Even if some reports are hyperbolic, the recurrence of the theme in multiple sources points to a historical reality in which removing another's skin was deliberately used as punishment and intimidation.